That's 6. Stream should go.
Like. You like.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Imam al-Muhasibi says, وَلَا تُخَالِفْ إِلَّا عَاقِلًا تَقِيًّا وَلَا تُجَالِسْ إِلَّا عَالِمًا بَصِيرًا وَقَدْ سُئِلَ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أي جلسائنا خير قال من ذكركم بالله رؤيته وزادكم في علمكم منطقه وذكركم بالآخرة عمله. So he says that do not mix with anyone but an intelligent, pious person. Taqi and muttaqi are the same word. So pious, God-fearing, God-conscious person, basically, those types of qualities. So somebody who is intelligent and God-conscious, and وَلَا تُجَالِسْ إِلَّا عَالِمًا بَصِيرًا, and don't sit with anyone except somebody who is a knowledgeable person and an insightful person. Somebody with insight, somebody with knowledge. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, who is the best company? So who are the best people to sit with and spend time with? So he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that a person who, when you see them, they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when they speak, it increases you in knowledge, and when they act, or their actions remind you of the akhirah. So this particular hadith has slightly different wordings in the version that Shaykh Abdul Fattah was able to find, which is narrated by Imam Suyuti in Al-Jami' al-Saghir, and the wording in that one is that the best of you are those. So rather than the whole context of who is the best person to keep company of, this particular version says that the best of you is the person who reminds you of Allah when you see them, whose speech increases you in knowledge, and whose actions create a desire for the akhirah in you. So it's slightly different. The qualities are there, but instead of the hadith being in response to the question of who is the best company, the Prophet ﷺ simply said that the best of you are people who possess these qualities. And there are basically other versions of this. But what the Prophet ﷺ described, these qualities, so somebody who, when you see them, they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they speak, it increases you in knowledge, and so on. These qualities are qualities that have been mentioned in the manaqib, or in the biographies of some of the Salaf, or some of the early Muslims. So, for example, we can see that several kind of stories gathered from biographies that Amr ibn Maymun al-Awdi, who was a tabi'i from Kufa, rahmatullahi alayhi, who kind of was born in Jahiliyyah, meaning he was born before the Prophet ﷺ became prophet, but passed away without meeting him, basically. So he kind of lived through the whole prophetic era, but didn't meet him. So therefore, is considered a tabi'i, not because he actually never spent time with the Prophet ﷺ. Although he's a contemporary of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So it said about him that he came to Kufa with Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu ta'ala anhu from Yemen, and he was a person of great piety and great service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, one of his students, says that when anybody would see Amr ibn Maymun al-Awdi, usually their immediate response would be to say a word of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Something like Subhanallah, Allah Akbar, MashaAllah, that just seeing him basically brought about that response. The same description is given of Muhammad ibn Sirin, who is regarded as the most virtuous, the greatest of the tabi'in. So it's worth mentioning these things because if you remember these names, then these are the biographies you need to read about. These are people whose stories or whose life stories are really worth reading. So Muhammad ibn Sirin, rahmatullahi alayhi, is considered. Many say that he is the best of all the tabi'in, the most virtuous of all of the students of the Sahaba. So it's said about him that when he used to pass in the market, anybody that saw him, right, it was almost involuntary that they would say words of dhikr. Like they had to kind of react by saying Subhanallah or something along those lines. Similarly, Hassan al-Basri, again, famous person in our history, celebrated tabi'i and scholar as well, and a mystic, if you want to use that term. He also, whenever he would be seen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be mentioned. One of his companions, Ash'ath ibn Abdullah, he says that whenever we entered upon Al-Hasan al-Basri, we would leave, and in that moment, we wouldn't consider the dunya to be anything of any worth. Meaning that spending any time with him would result in us losing kind of, in our minds, the dunya would lose all importance. His impact would basically focus us on the akhirah so much that we'd come out thinking, oh, the dunya is nothing. And this was the impact that these pious people had. Yunus ibn Ubayd, rahmatullahi alayhi, said that whenever anybody looked at Al-Hasan radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he would benefit from him in some way, even if he did not see his example. Meaning, even if he did not see the action of Hasan al-Basri, in some way or other, he would benefit. So even if he didn't see, so action-wise, like he didn't see what he was doing, didn't see him pray, didn't see him do an act of worship or anything like that, or he didn't hear him say anything, right? He just saw him. It was as though, as they walked away, a person would feel as though they benefited in some way just from seeing him. So let me finish. I'm going to ask you guys a question, okay? Okay. Yunus ibn Ubayd was also asked again, the same companion who mentions the last narration, that do you know anyone whose action is like the action of Hasan al-Basri? So he said, Wallahi, I don't know anybody who speaks like him, then how are they going to act like him? And then he described him. And this description is really interesting because, again, it shows what they discuss, what in English is often translated as otherworldliness, which in Arabic is called zuhud. You heard the word zuhud? Right? So zuhud is basically to be disinterested in the dunya. So in an age of materialism, it's a quality that's even hard to talk about. Like, I feel weird talking about it. Like it's like, not interested in the dunya, because it's like, oh, that's like, that's just the old way. That's what people. It's just not. What's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of um, like that kind of discourse is almost considered backwards in terms of like otherworldliness, right? Zuhud was so important that there are hadith compilations that are dedicated, like a whole genre of our tradition of hadith is the Zuhud genre, where hadith the ulama dedicated effort on just focusing on a hadith about Zuhud. Right? What was the purpose? Materialism has always existed, of course, right? I mean, we live in an era now where the materialism is unprecedented. It's never been this bad, meaning that it's got to a point now where it's self-destructive, meaning we're actually destroying ourselves, destroying families, destroying our humanity, destroying our resources, destroying the earth. I mean, it's got to that point, right? Overconsumption and materialism and so on. I mean, it wasn't even 200 years ago. It wasn't even as bad in the West. It wasn't this bad in the West. I'll say no more, right? So, so it was always there. But in those days, in an age where relatively it wasn't as bad as it is now, the idea of worldliness or materialism or being too concerned about the dunya was something that was of such concern to the ulama that they really focused their effort on it and created whole collections just on otherworldliness, on zuhud, basically, which is simply about being akhirah focused, being focused on the hereafter. So with that muqaddimah, with that kind of introduction in mind, take on board how Hassan al-Basri is being described here. When he came, it was as if he has just arrived after burying a very close friend. Meaning, when Hassan al-Basri entered upon you, he had this melancholy, this sadness about him that made it look like he was still grieving the burial of a friend, right? وَإِذَا جَلَسَ فَكَأَنَّهُ أُمِرَ بِضَرْبِ عُنُقِهِ. When he sat down, he kind of sat himself down and it seemed like he had such a heavy burden on him that it was as though his own execution had been ordered. Like he had absolutely lost faith in the dunya, in the world. وَإِذَا ذُكِرَتِ النَّارُ فَكَأَنَّهَا لَمْ تُخْلَقْ إِلَّا لَهُ. So there's all this talk of piety, of Hassan al-Basri's piety. We just read several examples, right? But whenever hellfire was mentioned, the way he behaved, it would appear as though hellfire had not been created for anyone but him. Like he was the only person that was deserving of the hellfire. And this is zuhud. The only qualification I'll make is that this doesn't mean that he wasn't a person who also had moments of happiness and so on and so forth. But when discussing deen, when he for the most part he was a person that kind of reflected that verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا, that let them laugh less and weep more. And the Prophet ﷺ says, along the similar lines, he says, لو تعلمون ما أعلم لا ضحكتم قليلا ولا بكيتم كثيرا. That if you knew what I knew, then you would have laughed less and you would have wept more. The idea being that if you understood what you are going to face in the akhirah, right? If you could see what I have seen, like for example in the Mi'raj and what I know for fact waits for us in the akhirah, then you'd have a lot more concern about the akhirah than the joys of the dunya. And in that sense, you would. And you'll see examples of other pious people who were more jolly coming up. So there were these different tendencies among people. But for the most part, what the underlying quality in them was this quality of zuhd. And of course, the quality being described here is is the impression that people took of them. Not necessarily, it's when a person sees them, they think akhirah. When a person sees them, they think dunya is nothing. When a person sees them, right, they think, you know what, I need some perspective in my life. That's the impression that's what they take from the person. And in the case of Hassan al-Basri, one description of him is that you kind of benefit in these spiritual ways without necessarily hearing him say anything or seeing him do anything. Mus'ab ibn Abdullah describes Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayhi, the famous Imam Malik, the man whose ijtihad, the Maliki method, is based on, the great scholar of Medina. It is said that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mentioned in front of him, his face would change color and he would slump his head. He tended to kind of look down like that in humility when the Prophet alaihi salatu wasallam was mentioned. And obviously, Imam Malik is a muhaddith, right? So how many times is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in front of him? Well, it's like every minute, every other minute. So it said that, like, when this happened, obviously so often that it was difficult to witness it. They said that people who used to sit in his company, they used to find it difficult to like be in the presence of that, where he's so consistently kind of dropping his head, his face discoloring when he heard the Prophet ﷺ. It's an out of emotion, of course. So one day, someone couldn't take it anymore, right? And they said to him, like Sheikh, like what's this about? Like every time the Prophet is mentioned, we're finding it difficult, like your color changes and so on. So he said, look, if you had seen the examples of others that I have seen, then you wouldn't think it's weird. From speaking in our kind of colloquial, you wouldn't think it's strange what you see in me. And he says that when I used to come to Muhammad ibn Munkadir, he was one of the people that he used to go to study, again, a famous tabi'i, who was known to be like the leader of the scholars in his time, the leader of the Qur'an. So he said that whenever we asked him about a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would weep until we felt sorry for him. Right? I've kind of seen people like that. It does kind of, it starts to get to you eventually. You're thinking like, how does this guy cry so much? Right? But that's just how they feel. I mean, that is how they feel. When the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in front of them, they're overtaken with such emotion, they can't stop crying. Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi himself, this is either Imam Malik or Mus'ab ibn Abdullah saying that I used to come to Ja'far ibn Muhammad, i.e. Ja'far al-Sadiq radiyallahu anhu, who normally was full of laughter and jokes. Okay, so that's what I meant. That people's personalities were diverse, even among them. It doesn't mean that everybody was kind of filled with melancholy all the time. So Ja'far al-Sadiq is described as kathir al-mizahi wa tabassum. He liked to joke around a lot, and he was very kind of smiley and jolly. But when the Prophet ﷺ was mentioned in front of him, his face would change. It would kind of go yellowy, greeny in color. And so the narrator says that whenever I felt that my heart was hardening and I felt hard-hearted and I felt that I needed softening, I used to go to Muhammad ibn Munkadir and I would just look at him. And he said that just looking at him would give me I'd take heed from that and it will soften me up for some time. That would kind of last. Just the experience of looking at him would last for some time. So this is this idea that whenever that a great company is people who, when you see them, you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how, regardless of what the status of the hadith is, this is actually how some of the some of the early Muslims are described by their companions. So in the hadith, there's also the word وَزَادَ فِي عِلْمِكُمْ مَنْطِقُهُ, that when they speak, it increases you in knowledge, right? So kind of along those lines, there's a few interesting descriptions, very kindly compiled by Shaykh Abdul Fattah, that Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu, the famous Sahabi, who himself was known for being a scholar among the Sahaba, right? So that's important context. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu ta'ala anhu says that there is a gathering, or like the company of somebody, or rather one sitting, right? One sitting with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, so another famous companion. One sitting with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu puts more confidence in me than the good deeds of a year, right? So awthaqu fi nafsi. So it builds a kind of confidence and steadfastness inside my heart, just spending some time with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu than I would get if I spent a year just doing good deeds, right? And there is in the biography of a famous tabi'i called Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud, rahmatullahi alayhi wa radiyallahu anhu, who is one of the fuqaha of one of the 7 faqihs of Medina, so one of the 7 famous jurists of Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. So it is said in his biography that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the famous Khalifa, you know the name, right? There's a famous Khalifa who was such a just Khalifa that people often describe him as the 5th of the Khulafa Rashidun, the 5th of the rightly guided Khalifas, and they used to often refer to him as the 2nd Umar after Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said that to spend some time in the company of Ubaydullah, that tabi'i, Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud, he says, spending some time with him is more beloved to me than the world and whatever it contains. He was also reported to have said about the same person that if I could, I would buy a night, right, like one night out of many, in the company of Ubaydullah for 1,000 dinars from the Baytul Mal, meaning from the public purse, right? So this is, of course, is strange because Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is known for being extremely scrupulous and strict with public money. So people asked him that. They said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, like, how can you say that? You're super strict with public money. You know, you don't let it get spent willy-nilly at all. But you're saying that you spend 1,000 dinars, not dirhams, dinars, right, on a night in the company of this person. So he says, do you guys understand? He said, Wallahi, I would return, having spent that time with him, I would return with his opinions, his nasiha, his guidance upon matters of the Baytul Mal that would give me thousands and thousands of dinars in return. Right? Such is his knowledge and such is his wisdom. He said, indeed, in speaking to him and the likes of him, there is a kind of a clearing of the intellect, a comforting of the heart, and a freeing of concerns, and a purifying of one's etiquette. It's interesting precedent, though. Like it's like spending money on consultancy in modern parlance. All right, but kind of consultancy of the pious. Yeah, so I'm available for hire if you want. 1,000 dinars, right? What is that in today's money? I mean, that's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, there you go. So, Muslim consultancy fees. We have precedent from Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. If you can be like Ubaydullah, of course, which kind of throws everything off. Anyway, so these are just some examples, and there are many more. These are just some gathered from the biographies of of the pious. And if you want to, you can go on and actually compile examples of this from Bibles for the pious in terms of, in terms of many other qualities as well. But the point is that, like people like that existed, kind of, right? The difficulty is that it can seem as though those are examples that are so far away and impossible to emulate because they are so close to the Prophet ﷺ. And perhaps the only reason why they could be like that, why their otherworldliness was so profound, was because they were so close to the prophetic era, because they were students of they were students of the Prophet directly, or the students of the Prophet ﷺ. Therefore, the power of the spirituality of the Prophet ﷺ was something that directly affected them, right? Or there was such proximity. They knew people who knew the Prophet. Right? I mean, how can you compare that, right? So, which is why the question to me was going to be, like, have you ever come across people who kind of you look at and they remind you of Allah, or you think, oh, subhanallah? No, no witness.
Yeah.
One hand. Anyone else? Like, it's a very personal thing, though, isn't it? It's a very personal thing, right? No, not in that way. Not because they're gonna. No, not because they're gonna like invade your space and say, "Did you pray your fajr today?" No, not in that way. Although I'll tell you a story I read last night, right? So last night I was reading. I keep mentioning this and I keep forgetting the exact title of the book because it's so long. But it's Maulana Manazir Ahsan Gilani's book on the history of the Islamic education system in India, right? It's a really, really good book. Unbelievably, he wrote it. It's like 700 pages, and he wrote it in 2 weeks during a period. And he's not even a prolific author. Like when I was reading the introduction, he's saying, "I'm not a prolific author. Please, forgive my mistakes. I haven't had a chance to look through it again. I literally just made a manuscript. I wrote a manuscript and I sent it to the publishers." And it was the students who had an exam break. I had this gap in teaching, and I saw this invitation for papers from Darul Deoband, and I thought I'd write 5 or 6 pages. And he said, before I knew it, it was 700, right? And he kind of wrote it, and he said, "You know what? If they want to publish it, they publish it. Let me just send it off." And they just sent it off just like that, right? So, which is why it is actually quite a difficult read, because he hasn't translated any of the Persian poetry and any of the Persian citations. So my Persian is non-existent. I'm using Google Translate. It's so hard.
Wow.
Right?
Google.
So I did kind of pick up some Persian from the footnotes of this book that I was reliant upon for Arabic grammar a long time ago when I was like 15. But in those days, there were quite a lot of people who could ask, like, what is this? What's this ast, and what's this namod and buad, and all of these strange words, right? And they tell you, and you realize that that this means the, and then slowly you kind of pick it up. But I've lost all of that now, so it's so hard. But anyway, he did, like pious people, and people who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on, right? But not in the way of kind of them intervening in your space all the time. Yes, that's the point of it. So he tells this story of a great muhaddith. This is before the days of the institutions, right? So this is like, he mentions it somewhere. This is like, is it 11th century, 12th century? Hijri. Yeah, 12th century. So kind of early days of the British Raj, I would think, right, isn't it? When the British Raj, early days of the British Raj in India. So he gives the example of this scholar who, once upon a time, he was talking about how people's fortunes change after they have extreme reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the path of seeking knowledge. He tells this story of this scholar who, during his student days, um, would often suffer like near starvation, like going days without eating. But he had such, as a student of knowledge, he had such pride in knowledge. He describes it as ghira fil ilm. It's a kind of like the pride in his status as a student of knowledge that he won't reach out. He will only rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, won't ask anyone else. That one day somebody took him, one day he felt that I'm starving, I need to eat. And on that day somebody brought him food, and it felt like his desire for, like somebody had brought food that he had desired. So he turned around back. And he said, like, I've desired this side, but I don't feel like I should eat it. Because in his mind, he felt that it needed to be pure and it needed to come purely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not be, he felt that something was tainted, right? But it was one of his students who kind of had studied mantiq under him, right? So it was clever, yeah, who kind of went away until he felt that he's despaired of this food. So he kind of just quietly, he understood and he just said, you want to eat it? He said, no, I'm not going to eat this because my heart has been seeking it too much. So he takes it away. After a while, brings it back and says, I brought more food for you. You know, so he's like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, when I took it away, were you desiring this food? So he said, no. Well, he said, well, in that case,
Eat it.
you have to eat it. So this was like once upon a time in his life. But then later on, things changed, right? The rulers came, gave him land and property so that he could teach the deen to students, you know, and he was in a situation where he was giving money to people and whole communities were kind of dependent upon his generosity. This is how things change. So one day, there's so much to learn from this story, but one day he saw that one particular individual, a local trader, what regularly wouldn't come to the Jama'ah in the masjid, right? So he notices that he doesn't come to the Jama'ah. One day he approaches him and stops him and he says, you know, like, brother, why don't you, so this whole intervention thing, right, kind of in your face. So why don't you, how come you don't come to the Jama'ah? I never see you in the Jama'ah. So the man, wow, and he's blatant. And he said, I lose out financially when I come to the Jama'ah. So he said, really? Is that how much do you lose? If you were to come to all 5 Jama'ahs, you know, how much would you lose? He said something like 1 paisa. I don't know how much that is. No idea. But he said, I lose 1 paisa. So he said, okay, if I could compensate you for that 1 paisa, would you come to the Jama'ah? So he said, so the man said, yeah, you know, okay. So he basically kind of, he stipulated that he, from his money, from the money that he had, he would give him the equivalent of 1 paisa a day. So 1 paisa per day for the 5 salawat that he would attend as compensation, basically. So a while later, he realized that the man was praying without wudu.
Wow.
Right? So he said to him,
It's interesting.
how can you pray without wudu? Right? And this is like recorded in his biography, this story, right? How can you pray without wudu? The man said, what, you want me to pray with wudu with 1 paisa? He said, for 1 paisa, you want me to pray with wudu? So he says to him, well, okay, will you pray with wudu if I give you 2 paisa a day? The man says, okay, I'll pray with wudu if you give me 2 paisa. So he does a second deal with him, right, and starts giving him 2 paisa. Yeah? For praying, for praying with wudu. But this story stood out because I was recently, I was refreshing my reading on the battle of Hunayn, right? And it kind of reminded me of something in Hunayn. And the lesson was that sometimes people come to deen because of dunya, through dunya. And sometimes you have to give people dunya so that they get deen, right? So this, and eventually what happened was this created a kind of habit and routine in the man, eventually leading to him actually praying sincerely. Because the habit built up, he started to enjoy it, he started to enjoy the jama'ah and so on. And the Sheikh understood this.
So we have encouragement.
So it was his way of making sure that he came, right? Which was again is something that I saw in the Battle of Hunayn, where the Prophet ﷺ, the Tulaqa of Mecca, right? 2,000 of them became Muslim when Mecca was conquered. They were new Muslims. They had just been forgiven for all of their crimes before Fathu Mecca. And then the Battle of Hunayn, literally months after, a few months, the Prophet ﷺ still hasn't left Mecca to go back to Medina. And the Hawazin and the Thaqif, they gather between 25 and 40,000 soldiers to attack Mecca, thinking that this is it. He's taken Mecca. If we don't stop him now, we'll never be able to stop him. So they turn up with everything. All of their men, they turn up with all of their women, they turn up with all of their children, and they bring all of their wealth. So it was a man called Malik ibn Auf who was leading them. It was his strategy to create a kind of all or nothing psychology in the soldiers. Like there's nothing to go back to. You either win the battle or you lose everything. Right? That was the idea. So they turn up with all of this booty. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the Muslims are victorious, right? And obviously the Prophet now has an unprecedented amount of booty. Like, I mean, so much wealth. So one Bedouin sees the Prophet's fifth. The Prophet gets 1/5 of all ghanaim, of all booty, right? I mean, it's in the Quran, isn't it? فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ. So he sees all of these animals grazing between two mountains, and it's all the Prophet ﷺ's faith. And the Prophet ﷺ looks at this man admiring all of this wealth, and he says to him, "You like it?" And the man is like, he's looking at it thinking, "Wow, it would feed." He's a leader of a tribe. Like this would feed my people for like forever. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Okay, take it. Here, look, it's yours." And it's like there's this interesting wording that the man kind of he gets his men and they take the animals away, but he kept looking over his shoulder. Kept looking over his shoulder, like, is this some kind of trick? But the effect of it is that he goes back to his people and he says, "Listen." He goes back to his tribe and says, "Listen, people, like I've just come back from like the best of all people." He said he spends like he doesn't fear any poverty. Like, how does somebody do that? How does somebody give away? Because that one incident, I mean, what is it? A valley of animals? I mean, what is that worth? How many million is that worth? We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of camels and sheep and goats and so on, right? And he's just like, "Oh, you like it?" The guy's admiring. He's like, "You like it? Take it." So he said to him, his way of for him, the proof of prophethood isn't that the Prophet ﷺ gave him all that wealth. It was this one statement. It was he spends as though he does not fear poverty. For him, that was the dalil al-nubuwah. That was the proof of prophethood. And that whole tribe came into Islam because of this man coveting dunya. This man coveting wealth, right? Another man says, like, "I hated Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but then he gave me and he gave me and he gave me and he gave me until I loved him." And it was all just dunya. It was his own love for wealth that led him to love the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ understood this really well. And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands this tendency of people really well, which is why one of the categories of zakah was وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ, that zakah can be spent on people whose heart, for the sake of softening their hearts towards Islam, right? Anyway, so that's the story, all from what you said, right? Intervening and kind of. So that's not what's meant, despite that massive tangent. What we mean by them reminding you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't them saying, did you pray Fajr today? But something a bit more, like there's something about their aura, there's something about their example that reminds you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyone?
There'll be a book soon. Pictures and such.
Yeah. So it's you need one of your desires should be to find people like that and spend some time with them. You don't have to go far, right? Meaning it can be somebody who says, like my mum, she every night she prays the Hajj, and so on. And you say, oh, could I have a sleeper for a little bit? It could be something simple as that, right? Or somebody describing like their mother or their father's piety or something like that, and you're like, would you mind if I spent some time with yours and I'd like to witness it, because it's true. It's really something, honestly. It's really, really something. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have, because you get to, what we just read seems like another paradigm, right? It brings it a lot closer when you realize there's actually people who are like that today. That you can actually have such focus on your desire to succeed in the akhirah that you're always, it's like your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive, right? And you're constantly connecting, and you take great joy and pleasure out of it. And that's like, why else would a person recite Quran 2 or 3 times a day, be constantly engaged in dhikr, every salah is on time, every sunnah, every nafil is prayed, and then more, and then some more, and then another 10-15 minutes sitting. And yes, some of these people are elderly, but we'd be lucky if we were like that. I mean, it is a great blessing to be like that at old age. I mean, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a person who doesn't focus on worship at old age is stupid. It's the most stupid person ever. I mean, if you're not reminded when you're on the doorstep of death, then there is something wrong with you, right? Anyway, so you should seek people like that out. There's nothing more powerful than good company like that, right? And the power of that company is the reason why this advice is relevant. That what kind of people should, what kind of company should we keep? The Prophet ﷺ describes pious people, and he says, "Humul julasa'u la yashqa jalisuhum." That these people are good company. Anybody who spends time in their company will never fail. La yashqa jalisuhum means that they'll never, it will never be a misfortune, right? To spend time in these people, you always go away with something of benefit. Anyway, okay. وتواضع للحق واخضع له وأدم ذكر الله تنل قربه. And وتواضع للحق واخضع له, be humble to the truth. Be humble to the truth, and lower yourself to it. Kind of slightly repetitive, but same sort of thing. وأدم ذكر الله تنل قربه. And continuously remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, continuously engage in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will achieve his nearness, meaning Allah's nearness. Okay, again, these are qualities that are worth looking at in the examples of the people before us. So pious Muslims, their attitude used to be that they didn't really care where truth came from. If it came, they accepted it. That was their attitude. So this is really interesting story about Amr ibn Ubayd, who said something on a particular issue. There was a scholar who said something on a particular mas'ala and made a mistake. And so Wasil ibn Ata, right? That name is very important. So Wasil ibn Ata debated him and corrected him. Kind of objected and said, hang on, I think you said that wrong. They had a discussion. And Amr ibn Ubayd realized that he was wrong in the Masala. Okay? And so he acknowledged his error and said, there is no enmity between me and the truth. The truth is not my enemy. And why did he say that? Because of what Wasil ibn Ata was. Wasil ibn Ata was the leader of the Mu'tazila. Right? So he was a man who generally in the Muslim community was known to be a deviant. He was known to be a deviant. What is our tendency today? Somebody you normally disagree with, somebody you normally don't think is, I don't know, pious, or who generally is from a group that, like where for whatever reason we don't agree with and so on. If they correct you, it's not taken very well, right? That's the attitude. So that's the point, that it doesn't matter where the truth comes from, you accept it. There's another interesting thing as well, is that in that sense, the Mu'tazila, the memory of the Mu'tazilites, right? So how we remember the Mu'tazilites in our theology is, of course, as a group that's, very, very deviant. All of the books of the Sunni books of theology warn against them, and so on. But at the time, they were very much part of the Muslim community. They were very much part of the Muslim community who openly engage their ideas. They engage the Muslim with their ideas. So meaning their ability to, they were so. There weren't any threats of violence or bannings from masajid and things like that, right? There was no censorship. They were allowed to engage and be among people, to the extent that their ideas did spread, and there was a point at which one of the Abbasid Khalifas himself became Mu'tazilite, at which point they gained a lot more favor and gained some power, and there was tension as a result of it. But generally, they were, like, there'd be a Mu'tazili majlis in the masjid, for example. There'd be a Mu'tazili circle in the masjid, and it was okay. Like, we were all right with it. Which kind of, that's interesting from a tolerance point of view.
Were they called Mu'tazila at the same time as well? Or
They were known to be deviant.
just deviant?
Yeah, they were known to be deviant. They weren't necessarily known that they did this. They didn't call themselves the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila was the name given to them by their opponents. Right? If I can remember correctly, they referred to themselves as Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed. Thank you. They referred to themselves as Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed, the people of justice and Tawheed and oneness. There's reasons for it. We're going to go into long theological discussion, but there's a reason why they refer to themselves as the people of justice and Tawheed. It was very much tied with their theology. Okay, so Tawheed, because they believe that Allah didn't have attributes, and all of Allah's attributes existed within Allah's essence. They didn't believe in essence and attributes, because they believed that to believe in attributes separately is a type of shirk. And because they were the ones that argued in favor of absolute Tawheed, even Tawheed that denied Allah's attributes, they proudly called themselves the people of Tawheed. And they also called themselves the people of justice. That slips my mind now. Do you remember?
So they put emphasis on justice in the Akhirah. The people who sin on the matter that didn't repent.
I thought it was that. But
Isn't
I'm
it
not
more
sure.
that they believe that Allah is just, and therefore He wasn't.
They believe that Allah had to be just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They believe that Allah's justice was obligatory.
Yeah.
And that Allah had to punish the sinner, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to reward the a person, the person who does good deeds, meaning they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was was compelled by our actions to reward the people who did good and to punish the people who did bad. That was one aspect, and possibly the other aspect is that they believe that
I mean, that's related to that as well.
yeah.
Does it result in them denying that قدر خيره وشره?
Well, they believe that no, I think the aspect of qadr is that they believe man was the maker of their own destiny. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave man the potential. Interestingly, I think there are other philosophers who believe that, but man was given the potential for action, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was passive after that. They then created their own action. So essentially, that when it comes to man's free will, man's qadr essentially is his own, right? And they also believe that a person who commits a major sin will be permanently destined to hellfire. So
Wasn't that the
no, both the Mu'tazila believe that, and the Qadariyya and the Khawarij.
Khawarij? That's
They both. This is one of their common beliefs that
What do the Shia say? Sorry to get. What do the Shia say about the Mu'tazila? Is there any like links between them, or?
it's widely believed that that many aspects of Mu'tazili philosophy has actually been imbibed in Shiism. That Shia philosophy is very much Mu'tazili in many aspects of it. Not everything, but a lot of Mu'taziliism as a philosophy, as a theology, actually survived within Shiism. Right? How much I don't know, but that is that's a widely held assumption about Shi'i theology and philosophy. Anyway, so even though the haqq, I mean, they had all of these ideas, right? And it was well known that they had these beliefs, and they used to propagate them openly. They used to have open halaqah where they used to discuss them. But for Amr ibn Ubayd, it didn't matter that the truth came from Wasil ibn Attar. For him, the truth is the truth. So his comment at the end is that there is no, I'm not the enemy of the truth. There is no enmity between me and the truth, even though I might have enmity between the person who spoke the truth. That was his point. Ibn Hajar rahmatullahi alayhi mentions in the biography of Ubaydullah ibn Hasan al-Ambari, again we're talking about mid-second century he was born, so third century, who was from Basra, one of the scholars and jurists of Basra. He was also Qadi at some point. And he says that Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, who's one of his students, says that we were in a janaza and we asked him a mas'ala, probably about janaza, and he kind of answered erroneously, right? So he didn't answer the mas'ala correctly. So I said to him, may Allah rectify you, the correct answer to this is this. So he kind of dropped his head for a second and then raised his head and said, in that case, I retract what I said in humility. I would rather be a tail. It's an interesting line. He said, I'd rather be a tail on the truth than be the head of batil. I'd rather be a tail on the truth rather than be the head of batil or the leader of batil. It was his way of saying that, look, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter that right now I feel quite embarrassed. That's his point, right? Like, it's quite embarrassing that I've just been corrected in public. But I'd rather be in this humiliating situation and be the tail of haqq than retain my status quo and my social status as a great scholar and so on, and not be corrected, right? which for him is batil. Anyway, so this is the example of people before us when it comes to yielding to the truth and submitting to the truth, regardless of where the truth came from. And of course, remember, we've discussed this many times before. What's the opposite? The opposite is that arrogance is denying the truth. Arrogance is denial of the truth. Remember the hadith? It's really important to make these connections. Arrogance is denial of the truth, and it is connected to this. It's denial of the truth because you don't accept the source. Does that make sense? So over here, when somebody who, like in the case of, in the earlier example, Wasil ibn Atta was correcting one of the scholars, but he accepted the correction regardless of the person, right? Similarly, sometimes people hear the truth from a person, but because they look down on the person, they're like, "Oh, shut up!" Right? You know, like you be quiet. We've got this. We've got this. Right? And this happens all the time. Why? Because you're the boss and that person's like brings the name or something. Right? And more importantly, if it's a matter of religion, then it's even worse. Anyway, and then the next line is that constantly remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will achieve his nearness. This is important because this is one of the benefits of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically one of the easiest deeds with the greatest benefits. Right? So it costs nothing, it takes no time, it takes no energy, hardly any effort. It is not time bound, it is not space bound. Okay? So you can, subhanallah, for example, is a form of verbal dhikr, right? You just verbalized, verbally you glorified Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Or you declared Allah's purity. It's called tasbih. When you say subhanallah, or any words that include tasbih, subhanallah. In prayer you say subhana rabbiyal azim, that's tasbih. You say subhana rabbiyal a'la, that is tasbih. The Prophet ﷺ taught subhanallah wa bihamdihi, that is tasbih. And any other words that include tasbih, right? Tasbih is something that Allah commands, right? Sabbih isma rabbikal a'la, right? Allah tells us that the heavens and the earth make tasbih, they declare Allah's purity. Sabbaha lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. Right? Everything in the heavens and the earth makes tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yusabbihu lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard, al-malik al-quddus al-aziz al-alim. And so on and so forth. It's all over the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to make tasbih of Allah morning and evening. So this is, in its simplest form, is just to say subhanallah. Just say subhanallah. So you have now verbalized. There's no time when you can't do it. You can do it at any time. There's no place where you can't do it. Right? To the extent that there's a massive debate. It's strange, but this is massive discussion in the books of hadith about a description of the Prophet ﷺ made by Aisha radiallahu anha, in which she said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam remembered Allah in all of his moments. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يذكر الله في كل حين. So the ulama asked the question, did he do it when he went to the bathroom?
Good question.
Right? It's like, and there's a whole conversation about, okay, well, did he, would he, etc., etc. And the answer is, yes, he did, but he may not have verbalized it. Right? And the ulama clearly talk about how there is something called the remembrance of Allah with the heart, and how remembrance of Allah with the heart is superior to remembrance of Allah that is just on the tongue with the absence of the heart. Meaning a person could just be saying subhanallah, 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 and kind of taking a drink, subhanallah, and that's just remembrance. That's your tongue constantly regurgitating the word. That still has benefit. That is still beneficial, right? So, but if a person was kind of just sitting there, kind of in meditation, and in their mind they're going, and their heart is saying, they're repeating subhanallah in their mind and their heart. That is superior to just verbalizing it. And the best is when both are in harmony. When you verbalize it and your heart is in tune with your verbalization, that is the best form of dhikr. And that the Prophet ﷺ, his heart, him remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of his moments means that if he isn't verbalizing, then it's in his heart. In his heart, he is still remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that there's no place or time restriction. Right? If you can't verbalize it because you're somewhere where you think it's inappropriate, it can be in your mind. But yet it's one of the most rewarding and the most beneficial. It has benefits in the akhirah, it has benefits in the dunya. So I'll finish with this. I didn't get through many lines today because of all of these stories. But Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi, he in one of his books, Al-Wabil al-Sayyib, it's called Al-Wabil al-Sayyib, he mentions the benefits of dhikr. And I think he mentions something like 100, right? So I can't get through 100. I can't get through 100, but it's all mentioned here. But I'll mention a few, right? So I'm just going to translate. So it is the sustenance of the heart and the soul. Like each one of these can be elaborated upon, right? So I don't know. Have I mentioned before that remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is food for the soul? The way what we eat is food for the body. Did I mention that? Right, so there you go. So that's what we mean. So if you want to feed your soul, you make dhikr of Allah. So it is sustenance of the heart and the soul. I started in the wrong place. So it pleases the All Merciful, meaning it pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It repels the shaitan. It removes grief. It removes anxiety, stress, grief. It's actually a really, really good way to kind of overcome stress and anxiety. It makes a person happy. Happiness is one of the benefits of dhikr. It strengthens the heart and the body, right? It enlightens the heart and the face, meaning that it gives it. People who do a lot of dhikr, they have this nur on their face, which is difficult to describe. Some people say, "Oh, I can see nur on somebody's face," but they have no idea what they're talking about. But it's a spiritual nur. It's there, and it's sometimes it's correctly noticed, and sometimes people just make it up. وَيَجْلِبُ الرِّزْقِ, it actually it makes one's sustenance easy. Yajlubu means it brings one sustenance. It brings one sustenance. وَيَكْسِبُ الْمَهَابَةَ وَالْحَلَاوَةَ, it allows a person to kind of acquire a certain awe as well as sweetness, right? Both in worship as well as in remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It breeds the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the soul of Islam. وَيُورِثُ مَحَبَّةَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى الَّتِي هِيَ رُوحُ الْإِسْلَامِ. Right? The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the soul of Islam. وَيُورِثُ الْمَعْرِفَةَ وَالْإِنَابَةَ وَالْقُرْبَةَ. Loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or learning to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is one of the obligations of Islam. It's one of the spiritual obligations of Islam. Love of Allah, love of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Not the kind of love that naturally exists within you for your mother or your father or for your siblings or for your son or daughter, which is to do with those kind of human connections, right? That is what we call al-hubb al-tabi'i, a kind of natural love. What natural love is not what is required of us, but a kind of acquired love that people have to. We have to kind of choose to love Allah and His Messenger, and we have to grow within us the knowledge of Allah and His Messenger that will create that, right? And there's a whole philosophy. The ulama discussed. I mean, it's so important. It's an obligation, right? So ulama discussed it. So I wish that we discuss these obligations like a lot more. And the basic idea is that when you always love people for reasons, even if those reasons are subconscious. So it's because you find beauty in them, right? Yeah, you find beauty in them. It's because you even subconsciously acknowledge a favor of theirs upon you, right? It is, so therefore it is kind of out of gratitude, right? And so meaning there are There are reasons. They are, you find that they are in fact good. There is goodness within them that makes them lovable. Yes. So sometimes it's their outer beauty. Other times it's their inner beauty. Meaning all of these factors make us love people, and those factors exist even when we love people naturally, like our parents and so on. Which is why people who we are naturally supposed to love, we can hate if all of those ingredients that cause love become absent. Does that make sense? So acquired love is to basically find those meanings inside somebody, Allah, His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for whom we don't have natural love because of distance, right? But are they beautiful? Do they have favors upon us, for which we owe them our gratitude and love? Are they people who have inner beauty, outer beauty? Meaning all of the attributes that create natural love at a subconscious level because of proximity. Over here, even though we don't have a kind of physical proximity to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do all of those meanings exist, right? Which requires knowing them, learning about them, right? Finding what their qualities are. So Allah's attributes, the qualities of the Prophet alaihi salatu wasallam, and then through that developing an acquired love for them. That is a spiritual obligation. Okay, I wanted to mention that because I don't think I've mentioned it before. So وَيُرِثُ مَحَبَّةَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. So dhikr is one of, and if you want love inspired spiritually, then dhikr creates love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the soul of Islam. وَيُرِثُ الْمَعْرِفَةَ وَالْإِنَابَ وَالْقُرْبِ. And it creates in a person like the knowledge of Allah, ma'rifah, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a kind of returning unto Him. Inaba is a kind of you always go back. You're constantly going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similar meaning to tawbah, but not necessarily just in a repentant way. Not necessarily just in a repentant way. It's almost like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your base. You always return to base. There is this inaba, always back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It breeds in a person the heart of a kind of, it breeds in a person a living heart, right? And it causes Allah to remember the servant. So whether you hear it, whether you know it or not, it is declared. Like it's absolutely 100% certain that when you say Subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions you in some way, right? And you can't have any doubt in that. When you say Allahu Akbar, Allah mentions you in some way. You can't have any doubt in that. Because Allah declares it in the Quran. Every single one of these is evidence. Allah says, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Remember me, I will remember you. I mean, it's like, it's there. It's a verse of the Quran. You have to believe it. We have to believe every verse of the Quran. It's categorical and it's clear. Okay. Few more? Okay, 3 more quickly. So it is the sustenance of the heart and the soul. It removes the rust of the soul. So if you want to understand the rust of the soul, an easy way to understand it, it is the spots that cover the heart when a person commits sin. Right? So there's a hadith that talks about when a person commits a sin, nukita fi qalbi nuktatun, so that a black dot marks their heart. So think of it as a kind of metaphysical black dot, right? And then if they do a good deed, like if they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it goes. But then if they don't, if without doing good deeds they continue to do evil, then there's a black dot with another and another and another until their heart is covered. And that hadith says that is what Allah describes in the Quran when He says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Right? But their hearts have become rusted over, right, because of the sins that they have acquired. Okay. وَيَحُطُّ الْخَطَايَا. It removes sin. It raises a person's degrees in paradise. It creates uns, really, really good word actually. It creates familiarity. It's an amazing thing to say actually. It creates familiarity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Creates familiarity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيُزِيلُ الْوَحْشَةَ. It removes loneliness. People who are lonely, one cure for loneliness is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People who kind of do dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they kind of start to gradually become almost aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's spiritual presence, and therefore don't really care much for loneliness. There is a kind of withdrawal, right? Which is why the Prophet ﷺ kind of balances it out by encouraging spending time with people, because the consequence of just kind of the consequence of being really dedicated to your worship is to kind of end up really not needing people. Like, I don't need people for, I've got Allah, right? So the Prophet ﷺ says that actually no, you've got to do that as well. So he says that a person who mingles with people and puts up with their nonsense, in like my words, وَيَصْبِرُ عَلَىٰ أَذَاهُمْ, basically is patient in the face of the difficulties that they throw at you, right? He's better than the person who doesn't mingle, right? خَيْرٌ مِّنَ الَّذِي لَا يُخَالِطُ وَلَا يَصْبِرُ, right? And the hadith is actually, it's understood that the hadith is implying people who dedicate themselves to worship and don't mingle and stay away from people. So the Prophet ﷺ, you have to balance it out.
What if you're around criminals, like if you go to prison, for example? Or something?
Well, I mean, it's clear that the guidance is actually very, very clear that don't mingle who you mingle with causes you definitive harm or even probable harm, then you avoid, right? If that probability isn't there, then you mingle.
Then what about? Sorry.
It's really interesting how, in Islam, like the ulama, they always try to quantify, they always try to find a way to quantify so that they can give a clear answer, right? So I sometimes teach my students about this, like, like this idea of ghalabatul dhann in Islam is so important. The idea of probability. Like, how do I judge? Are they going to harm me? Aren't they going to? So your judgment has to be based on like probability. Is it most likely that they will harm me if I'm in their company? Let me think. Yeah, most likely. Plus, you decide according to that. Is it less likely that they will harm me? Less likely. Yes. You decide that, okay, khalas, then you can mingle. You just decide based on that.
So the man from Bani Israel, that when the angels of punishment were coming down, and just start with him because he wasn't doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and that.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you balance it out?
Well, that's how you balance it out. You don't do Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar where you do not. If you could do more harm than good. So Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar is not a. It's not a command without qualification. Does that make sense? So the clearest hadith about Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar is Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi. Whoever sees a bad deed, an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he cannot, then with his tongue. So there is the qualification. If he cannot, meaning it is qualified by ability to affect the change. Not ability to do, but ability to affect the change. That's important. So therefore, if ever you feel that you stepping in and doing Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar, like enjoining good and forbidding evil, with your hand is going to cause more harm than good, then you verbalize. If verbalizing is going to cause more harm than good, then you just let it be and just kind of despise it from within. Does that make sense? Meaning you really have to judge effectiveness, the effectiveness of what you do, rather than just blindly going in and enjoining good and forbidding evil and really coming across like a bit of a maniac. Does that make sense? It just doesn't work. So Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar is when, without any consideration, a person disengaged. They're just not interested. That person is the person who basically deserves, punishment at all costs. And then it's also down to like the nature of the sin. Like, for example, like the fuqaha will discuss, must the person put their life at risk to stop somebody's violent action? Right? And the answer is, well, they're not obligated to, but if they do, they will be rewarded for it. And if they perished, then they would be a martyr. Does that make sense? But they're not required to do that, because nobody is required to dive into a situation that will inevitably cause their destruction. So there's all of these kind of elements, meaning that there isn't a requirement to kind of enjoin good and forbid evil, regardless of consequence, at all cost, because it isn't even effective if you approach it in that way. Okay, but you do have to be concerned about it, meaning that balancing act of kind of weighing up your options is important. Why? Because when you don't give it consideration and you don't engage in trying to weigh the options and balance it out, then it inevitably leads to apathy. You actually end up disengaging, and you never speak up. You never speak up. You never try to stop people. You never try to step in, right? Because for you, it's like you just assume you aren't able. You just assume it's not going to be effective because you're never weighing it up. Whereas the norm should be that immediately a believer, when they see evil, they're agitated and they're wondering, can I, can't I, should I, shouldn't I? They're constantly engaged in that. There's this turbulence inside of them of should I do something, shouldn't I do something, which means that there are times when they step in and there are times when they don't step in because they're constantly trying to judge the situation. Does that make sense? And that's really what the state of a believer should be, rather than, okay, it's qualified by ability, so therefore I'm not able. And it's like kind of that's the standard. Do you know what I mean? You just assume you're not able all the time. There has to be this weighing up. Okay, so these are, I'll stop there. So these are some of the benefits of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions 100, and there are many more. I'll mention one really, really important, right? Which is that although it's it's such a minor thing to do, in fact, it's mustahab. It's actually mustahab as an act, meaning that it's not obligatory or anything. It's just mustahab, right? Yet, one of the strongest cases for busying oneself in dhikr is that dhikr creates in a person the ability to fulfill their obligation. It creates in a person the ability to fulfill their obligation, meaning it is not, although a mustahab act in and of itself, it is not detached from one's obligatory deeds, because it creates in a person the ability to do the obligatory. How? So the Prophet ﷺ, he was once asked by some companions who said, Messenger of Allah, like all of the do's and don'ts and the halal and the haram of Islam, inna shara'i al-Islam, the various commands of Islam, they become so many, so like meaning that we're finding it difficult. So is there a way to bring it all together, to make it easy, for ourselves? So the Prophet ﷺ gave this advice. He said, لا يزال لسانك رطبا من ذكر الله. Let your tongue always be moist with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ advised that if you want your salah, your sawm, your obligations and your dues to become easy for you, if you want avoiding haram to become easy, staying on the halal to become easy, right, which are obligations, then engage in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the mustahab that empowers and enables a person to do the fara'id. Right? That's I would argue that one of the most important benefits of engaging in dhikr. Okay, I can only allow 10 minutes of questions. Okay?
When you were saying about
That's one of the brothers, yes? Thank you. Wherever it was. Or one of the sisters, I don't know. You said it was one of the brothers.
Yeah, I think they're gone. Are they going to stay today? I think it was Khalid.
Okay, go ahead.
When the Prophet was going to relieve himself, then when he finished, he, according to the hadith, he would say Ghafranak.
Yes.
So some people who I think are incorrect, particularly because they're contradicting what you were saying, they think that it's because he wasn't able to remember Allah in that statement. I don't believe that's the case. So then my question then is, why did he say? And did he say it specifically for himself or specifically as a sunnah for us to say, and why?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the problem with the idea that he might have been seeking forgiveness because he hadn't remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's twofold problems. One is, even if we can accept that he said ghufranak because he disengaged from dhikr, because even those who say that he continued to make dhikr in his heart, in saying that, we're acknowledging that he ceased to make dhikr with his tongue.
Right.
So you could, I suppose, make the case that the Prophet
It's
ﷺ
less.
may have felt guilty for that, right? But I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that's the issue at all.
Yeah.
I think that it's more to do with the fact that he's teaching people, he's teaching people the etiquette, and that the Prophet ﷺ perhaps is teaching us to seek forgiveness, because that is a time when we are exposed. The time when we are exposed, because we go into the bathroom acknowledging that exposure, because the dua for going into the bathroom is Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith. So the whole idea really is that when you say the dua Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith, you acknowledge your vulnerability. We acknowledge our vulnerability when we go in, because we're saying, there's different interpretations for what those words mean, but the most popular one is that we seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection from male and female jinn, male and female shayateen, basically, right? And that means that we're susceptible to wasawis, we're vulnerable to waswasa, etc., etc., and therefore, ghufranak, when we come out, to say, Allah forgive me, or Allah I seek your forgiveness when we come out of the bathroom is appropriate. So, the other thing also is that it's khala. So obviously we use the term bathroom. That was not the case for them. And it's also a time when one kind of, they remove their clothes and they expose themselves. So these are all things that are there. The other thing also is that we make maghfir, we seek ghufran, or we seek forgiveness, almost as a form of remembrance. We don't always associate it with a particular sin, but we assume that we are always, that as a bare minimum, we are remiss of certain good deeds, right? And therefore we make up for what we owe in deeds, in good deeds. According to the hadith, in sadaqah, what we owe in sadaqah, we make up for it by doing good deeds and making istighfar, right? So على كل سلامة من ابن آدم صدقة كل يوم تطلع فيه الشمس, right? That hadith, and the hadith are kind of along that meaning, that upon every joint of mankind, right? Upon every joint of mankind, there is due a sadaqah, for the fact that you have it today. On every day that the sun rises, meaning every single day, for every joint that we have, right, a sadaqah is due upon us. So the Sahaba said to the Messenger of Allah, like, how are we going to do all that sadaqah? Like there's a tax on every joint, right? So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, well, every tasbih is a sadaqah, every subhanallah is a sadaqah, and every takbir is a sadaqah, every tahmeed is a sadaqah. So every time you say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu akbar, la ilaha illallah, this is all sadaqah. Wa amrun bil ma'ruf is sadaqah, to enjoin good is sadaqah. Wa nahyun 'anil munkar is sadaqah, to stop an evil is sadaqah, and so on, right? And in other hadith, the Prophet ﷺ enumerates many different forms of sadaqah. Okay, some amazing, some really, really fascinating. In one hadith, I came across the idea that, like it is a sadaqah to make a deaf person hear. Like I found that, just those words I found so amazing. I thought, like, how do you make a deaf person hear? So I thought, like, I'm sure Muslims were inspired to develop a way to communicate with deaf people inspired by this hadith, right? And I found that, like, that there's actually documented evidence that in Ottoman courts they were using sign language, because some of the Ottoman Salatin, they used to often keep vulnerable people in the palace to kind of take care of them and so on. So people with disabilities and people like that, they kind of keep them under their patronage and take care of them and so on. And often, and because people like that were around, they developed a way of communicating. But it's interesting. The wording is interesting. Like making a deaf person hear, right? To show a person to when a person asks you for directions, giving them directions is a halaqah, and so on and so forth. The Quran enumerates many. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else? Yes. Brother.
Are there any other classes or halaqahs you would recommend?
I mean, for classes, obviously, there's lots. I can't recommend any particular one, but just have a look at the website. I do hope the next time we do a monthly gathering, we get better attendance, inshallah. But the next one is the conference. So the next slot. So we changed the gathering slot to half term and a weekday because we realized weekends are probably not going to be very well attended. But the next one is actually our conference is falling on kind of around the next half term. So there won't be a kind of a separate monthly gathering until the half term after, and it'll be every 6 weeks. But other than that, at some point, Brother Khalis can confirm that at some point, some of the other faculty members will start delivering halaqah,
Starting March.
starting in March
On a different day?
on a different day, and like something else, maybe a different text, and so on.
It will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we going to do those? You know, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I may or may not continue.
This is weekly, right? Still
Yes,
weekly.
this is every week.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? And other halaqat, off the top of my head, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the different masajid have different halaqat. I know Islamic Masjid has a few. I don't know dates, but I'm sure they'll have them on their website. Okay, inshallah. And in terms of courses, the website. I think we're on like 30 or 40 every term courses on lots of different topics. So if you're not familiar with those, just check out the college's website, inshallah. Okay?
Sure.
Yes, sister. Right. Is that the recommended book? Zaid Shakir's one?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the English translation, inshallah, for you to read. Okay?
You mentioned the description of the people who are placed on well.
So it's good that I announced the halaqah in the course, right?
Well, yeah.
Good. People don't, mashallah.
Can you please give the description? Because I think
Of what?
the people who are described to be placed on well. The people who are described to be placed on well.
People are described to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
So in the beginning,
Yeah, I know that.
so we were talking about whose company should be kept, and a hadith was cited, that the people whose company you keep should be people who, when you see them, they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we weren't so much describing the qualities of the pious, but rather stories of people who were described in that way. So Hassan al-Basri, rahmatullahi alayhi, was often described as somebody who, when you saw him, you kind of tended to like come out, you say subhanallah or something. You know, people saw him and something came over them that they would make remembrance of Allah. Does that make sense? So that was the context of that whole conversation. Okay, but other than that, there's lots and lots of there's lots of qualities to discuss in it when it comes to fighting. Go on then, you might as well.
But this convention, what will they talk about?
So it's themed around Iman and identity in the 21st century, right? I'm telling you tentatively, okay? Because these topics have been written in a note somewhere. I'm telling you tentatively. One topic will be about developing a kind of a language of critique against the 21st century paradigm. Does that make sense? So we were tentatively calling it pushing back against modernity. meaning that there is this sense right now that Islam is the victim of all critique, right? It's kind of it's fair game to just critique Islam, and we don't have a language of critique back. So, but it's entirely a suggested topic. So we've suggested this topic to the speaker. We're not going to be able to force them to deliver an outstanding lecture on it, but that's an idea that we've thought about under that theme of Islam and identity in the 21st century. So one of the speakers, I've heard them discuss this in the past, and I've suggested, look, would you be willing to speak about this? Another one is about, I think it's probably about examples, something to do with the lived example of pious predecessors in faith. Those are the only two I can remember. I have to dig it up there in my notes somewhere. But kind of around this idea of Iman and identity in the 21st century, but both in terms of kind of how it manifests spiritually, but also in terms of how we carry ourselves and our identity as faithful, as people who are faithful to Islam in the 21st century. So there will be a discussion around that, John. Something along those lines. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Go ahead.
You know, in terms of what you say, Sheikh, in terms of seeing someone they remind you of Allah, etc. I'm sorry if it's a silly question or if it sounds childish or anything.
That's okay.
I don't see for those except we love each other that they get married. What if childhood love or something can blah blah blah, but then you're not sure if it is connected to God or not. Is that still a reason to get married because there was love and that will bring on the faith later on? Or
Well, it doesn't have to be connected to God, but it should be. Marriage is more than just an expression of love.
yeah,
So it is a coming together of two people, right? And those people have to live together and be in each other's spaces. So one has to consider whether that is going to be conducive to faith or obstructive of faith. So meaning that is the person somebody who will support you in faith and who won't get in the way of your deen? If they're going to get in the way of your deen, then you have a problem, right? But they are a person who values. So I always say values are important. So if you value the wrong things, if you value different things, you're always going to have problems. So you value deen, they value dunya. There's going to be an issue. You don't equally value dunya. You don't equally value deen. There's always going to be an issue. You value hijab, they don't. How are you going to
would it be
meaning that you want your spouse to wear the hijab, but they don't. Right? So how do you overcome that?
what if they wear the hijab and, for example, they're religious and etc., but at the same time they're finding it hard to do their prayers, and that's not a good basis, is it? To start off with.
Well,
But they want to.
Yeah, but it really depends. It depends. It's really, I really would never ever give a kind of yes or no answer to something like that. Simply because the nuances are infinite, right? In terms of why. It may well be that people like I know people who've married, who've gone and married somebody who's kind of new in the deen, not quite firm, etc., on the deen, and they married them purely to help them so that they can settle in the deen, and they did, and the marriage didn't work out later on, but that person ended up kind of becoming like a proper strong Muslim as a result of the marriage. So the nuances are infinite. You really can't say yes or no. It really is a matter for oneself to judge and decide on themselves based on taking consultation from friends and making istikhara and then trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making a decision. Right? There are certain things scholars cannot take away your need to make a decision. Right? They cannot decide for you. If they start doing that, you should be worried. Right? If the scholars start telling you who you should marry or whether or not you should marry somebody, I'd say, like, Don't take that advice. Make sure you own that decision. It's got to be your decision. Okay? Anyway, Jazakumullah khair. Send it there, inshallah. Okay? Assalamu alaikum.
YouTube live.
Yeah.